I'm Larry Fedoruk. This is my podcast. I Was 8, a weekly series. I grew up in the middle of the Great Canadian Prairie in a small town called Wakaw, Saskatchewan. It is the town of my childhood, and these are the stories of when I was 8. Timelines bend a little, and some of the names have been changed, but all of these stories mostly happened as told. I was 8.
Chapter 2, The Tent.
At some point in my childhood, right around the time I was 8, I decided that I needed a tent. Not wanted, needed. Blankets and sheets hung over chairs in the living room was just not roughing it. I need a goddamn tent, I declared one day, and was severely punished for taking the Lord's name in vain. In our house, only Dad could get away with that kind of language. You know, the F-bomb was not as bad as the GD in our home. I'd never get a tent with a mouth like that. I didn't know how to pitch a tent, but I had a sense of how to pitch the idea of my parents buying me a tent. I had seen the perfect tent in the catalog, which is what we used to call Amazon. It was bright blue, slept 4, had an optional canopy flap over the entrance, flaps over the screen mesh windows, and was completely waterproof. It could be my house, my fort, my headquarters. I could have friends over, and we could sleep in the tent in the yard. We lived in a small town across from an open field. That would be almost like camping. The tent was $25. Now, I had no real concept of money, not in any real sense, but I knew that $25 was a lot of GD money. I mean, a lot of money. But it wasn't impossible. My parents had paid thousands for a house and hundreds for a car. This I knew. Surely $25 for a tent that would make their son the most popular kid in town was doable. I cleaned up my language, whined, cajoled, begged, touted the advantage of a bright blue tent in the side yard of the house, and eventually reached the following agreement as school let out for the summer. The tent was $25. If I could save half, my parents would pony up the other half for the tent. Saving. Interesting. I had to ask what that involved. Well, allowance, do chores for folks around town, birthday money, found pennies, et al., would not be spent on toys or candy, but instead go into a piggy bank and eventually amount to $12.50. That could take years, but it was their final offer, so I accepted. I think my parents' strategy in getting me to save the money was that I'd either forget about wanting a tent altogether or B, take at least till Christmas to amass that fortune, by which time they could say that a prairie winter was no time for a tent, that I should wait for spring. That would give them almost an entire year to come up with their $12.50. I only figured that out years later, into college, when it dawned on me about the tent strategy. Within a week, my savings amounted to -50 cents. I'd lost a quarter out of some old crappy pants, and believe me, I retraced my steps over the last 6 days in search of it. And also, I had bet my friend Clarence that I could throw a tennis ball over his house into the backyard without the ball even touching the roof. Cannot, can too, cannot, can too. 2 bits as I can. Not even close. So around the time my dad, as a member in good standing of the local Lions Club, had to take his turn to help run the weekly Lions Club bingo, I tagged along and sat with my Grams, my dad's mom, a veritable bingo pro. In an effort to up her game and her chances, she bought an extra card, and knowing I was good with numbers, told me to watch it and mark it. for my efforts, she would give me half of whatever the card won. Well, you know where this is going. GD writes it is. First game, I scream bingo. Grams looks down at the card, echoes the sentiment at the top of her voice. Dad is the one who has to come over to verify the bingo. Dad's running the bingo. His mother and son win the first game. Oh, the fix was in. Except the fix wasn't in. We won bingo. Helen Fedorik wins $25. She dutifully counted out $13 and handed it over right there on the spot, telling me that for the extra 50 cents I could come over and weed her garden someday. Later that night, I demanded my tent. I had kept up my end of the deal. I came up with half the purchase price. You cannot renege on a deal. You know, I learned a valuable lesson that night. Saving was for suckers. I had my folks dead to rights, and they knew it. And, in hindsight, bless them for not coming up with some cheap parental excuse like, no, because I said so, or my dad's favorite, no, and what I says goes. Instead, in a few days, a big box was waiting for me at the post office. Frankly, not as big a box as I had expected. I had expected a box the full size of the tent that you'd cut open and drag a fully finished, erected tent out of, spike it into the ground, and let the fun begin. The box itself could be a secondary fort. I learned another valuable lesson that day, the dark perils of assembly required. I would have to put together and erect or pitch the tent with Dad's help, which meant, of course, Dad would put up the tent while I would watch impatiently. Hand me a hammer. Okay, those are pliers. Sorry. These are, of course, the good deeds that your parents do throughout your life that go mostly unappreciated until much later. Plus, Dad was good at this stuff. He tried to show me how one metal rod would fit into another, forming a longer metal rod. He showed me where the rods go to make the tent walls and how the big one in the middle actually makes it a tent. I retained none of it. But by sunset, there was a bright blue tent in the side yard of the house. But I decided that camping out in it overnight would wait until the next day, when my friend Richard could get permission to come and sleep over. The side yard of our house got the morning sun, and by the time I wandered into the tent, there was a scorching sauna level of heat permeated by the odor of treated canvas. The new tent smell. I couldn't spend more than 5 minutes in it without gagging. I left all the flaps open and let it air out. By the time Richard came over, it was at least livable. Now, we didn't own sleeping bags. I guess that would have to wait for another bingo. But we had a good collection of older quilts and blankets and pillows, all of which retained a blue hue as soon as they touched any part of our tent. Even our hands were blue when we touched the canvas. We didn't care. We had a fort, an HQ, a place to camp out. And, as both sets of parents told us, we could always just come back in the house any time if we wanted. We had sandwiches and Kool-Aid in the tent. Then we went inside and watched TV. At around dusk, we made our way back into the tent for a night's rest. It was still super hot out and sticky hot in the tent. We didn't even need those makeshift sleeping bags. But so what? We're young and alive. We're having an adventure. Steps from the house, but still an adventure. We lived in a house across the street from the home of the local bully, Kenny, who usually hung out with another humorless thug, Nelson. As we turned out our flashlights and began to doze in pitch black, we could hear Kenny and Nelson coming up the street, talking and laughing about some thuggery, no doubt. Instead of crossing the street, they stood by our yard. We grew death quiet and actually crawled under the quilts, for added safety. I could hear Kenny. Hey, that Fedora kid got a tent. We should piss on it right now. Well, as much as I didn't like that idea, the tent was waterproof, so let him have at it. They must have sensed we were in there, perhaps just a guess, or maybe they could hear us sweating, wrapped in multiple quilts on a hot summer night, trying not to move a muscle. They got more creative. "Hey, why don't we open up the tent and piss inside it?" "Hey, is that a skunk trying to get in the tent?" said Nelson. Then they started to throw pebbles and twigs at it. Then Kenny said, "Hey, I heard it's against the law to have a tent in your yard without a permit. I'm going to call the cops." Oh, this went on until they ran out of ideas. And then we heard Kenny kind of go toward his house and Nelson shuffle down the street. Sensing the coast was clear, we ran into the house, slept in my room. The next day, we had to visit my uncle out on his farm, and we drove home in a windstorm so bad at times my dad could barely see the road from the dust blowing across it. It was late, so I went straight to bed. The next morning, I went out to see that my bright blue tent had a thick coating of dust all over it. Now a dull blue, dirty tent. I was devastated. My brand new tent. I asked my mother what to do. She suggested cleaning it. Brilliant. How? Well, she pointed out that it was my tent, and it was my responsibility to figure that out. Damn the life lessons. No fun at all. First thing I tried was the hose. I sprayed it down. The dust, however, had embedded itself in the canvas. Clear beads of water rolled down the sides, and the dust remained. What now? "Mom?" "All right, my responsibility." I got some rags out of the garage and tried wiping it while spraying with the hose. Nothing. I rummaged around and found a wire brush, one of those big hard ones designed to scrape peeling paint off wood. I went out and began scrubbing like my life depended on it. Like magic, the bright blue was returning. I also used the wet rag in combination, and after several long hours, I had restored my HQ to almost its original intense blue brightness. Now, with thunder and lightning in the sky, I decided that my next, I guess my first sleep in the tent, could wait till the following day. The next morning was clear and bright, with the smell of fresh air after a rain. I ran to the side yard to see the walls of my tent nearly collapsing from the weight of soggy canvas. I opened the flaps to go in, and water began rushing out. I estimate a good 8 inches of water had accumulated on the tent floor. I ran in and told Dad, who after surveying the damage was going to write a stern letter to the catalog demanding the money back over this shoddy merchandise. Then I explained what had happened. It seemed in my zeal for original blue, I had scrubbed not only the dirt out of the tent, but all of the waterproofing chemical that had been added. The tent was virtually useless. Dad took it down, hung it on the clothesline for a day, then shoved it into a box in the garage, where I assumed it stayed until it made its way to a landfill somewhere. That was the tent adventure. From first spying the tent in the catalog, through the cajoling, bingo, postal delivery, dust storm, rainstorm, my tent life lasted under 3 weeks. And there was still a good amount of summer vacation to go, and it was to be spent tentless. I think I remember, "Hope you learned your lesson" lecture. I think I nodded in affirmation, but inside my head the answer was nope. I guess it all turned out okay because for the rest of the summer I practiced my throwing. And on the way home from the first day of school, I threw a tennis ball clearly over Clarence's house. 50 cents on the line this time, sucker. Oh, and also, the day the tent was hanging on the line, I wandered downtown. There was a new bike in the window of the hardware store. Gold, silver fenders. It was almost $60. Hey, Gramps, when are we going to bingo again?
I Was 8 is a weekly series written, produced, and voiced by Larry Fedoruk. A new episode every Thursday. Share your stories with Larry, or if you like, share Larry's stories with a friend. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Larry Fedoruk, that's Fedoruk, can be reached at larryfedoruk37@gmail.com.